Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, with a population of over 225 million people. As a developing nation with looming population, civil society organizations, CSOs, have long been described as the third sector of the society, playing key roles in addressing a wide range of issues regarding Nigeria's social, economic, humanitarian and political systems. Over time, CSOs have developed innovative and creative ways of complementing the efforts of the government in the delivery of programs aimed at enhancing the lives of citizens, improving governance processes, and advocating for reforms that bring about development. But what are civil society organizations, and what have been their role in nation building? According to the United Nations definition, civil society organizations are non-profit, voluntary organizations that are independent of government, with a primary purpose for social, economic, cultural, educational, religious or humanitarian development. Some of the key roles played by CSOs in nation building has been to advocate for the rights of marginalized populations, including strengthening governance systems. What do representatives of some CSOs have to say?
Society has helped create governance awareness, helped people, citizens, to ask questions of those that they have elected. And as you know, it's important for citizens to ask questions of their elected leaders, and seeing the work that civil society has created in generating awareness about governance issues, issues related to rule of law, good governance, corruption, accountability. All of these are issues that society has worked on and continue to work on, and what we have seen is that citizens' consciousness has indeed revved up to heights that we probably have not seen before. So really quite helpful the way we have seen society build up and contribute to development and democracy.
Ebere Ifendu, President, Women in Politics Forum, WIPF, highlighted the immense contributions made by CSOs with regards to enhancing governance processes in Nigeria, noting that there would be a huge vacuum in Nigeria's democracy if CSOs are not allowed to function effectively.
Without the civil society, we will not have democracy. It's the civil society that fought for our democracy, and they have continued to fight for the sustainability of democracy, to ensure that there's a civic space for people, and to also ensure that there is a proper rule of law. The civil society, they have contributed immensely, for the development of women in leadership. We have been working together as a coalition, and without that strong voice coming from the civil society, some of the benefits we are enjoying today in Nigeria will not be able to enjoy. And I know that the civil society, they are not tired. They are still working to ensure that we have democracy and good governance that everyone will be proud of.
In her contribution, Bosede Akimbolushere, Executive Director of DICE, said that civil society is a helping hand to the government because the CSOs are closer to the people, urging those in government who see CSOs as a threat to have a rethink.
Generally, we're there to be like a helping hand to the government because civil society are closer to the grassroots. We are there with the people, we are like their mouthpiece, sort of, because we interact with them on a daily basis. At times, we break down those policies that we have in governance, we break it down for people to understand. Because if you pick it as it is, people don't even know what is happening. But as a society, we go there because we are used to people who understand the language of the government and we understand the language of the people. So we stand in the middle, we let the people understand what the government is saying, and we carry the voice of the people also to the government. This is what the people are saying.
Despite the efforts of CSOs in nation building and enhancing Nigeria's governance systems, there have been a growing trend by the government to enact laws and propose legislations that specifically target CSOs. These laws have been perceived to be implemented under the guise of increasing transparency and accountability. But many have argued that they are means to suppress civil society and limit the ability of CSOs to operate freely. Many CSOs in Nigeria have spoken out against these laws and legislations, arguing that they violate the fundamental principles of freedom of association and expression, calling on government to respect these rights and allow them to operate freely. In 2017, the 8th House of Representatives introduced a bill known as the Non-Governmental Organizations Regulatory Commission Bill, or simply the NGO Bill. The bill sought to regulate the activities of non-governmental organizations in the country and was met with significant controversy and opposition from civil society organizations, CSOs, and the international community. In response to the widespread opposition, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives had this to say.
The principal objective of the NGO Regulation Bill is to inject transparency, accountability, and prevent the subversion of national security from both within and without. No one can, no indeed should guard the operations of NGOs in Nigeria. But just as they aspire for this freedom, it must be amply stated that freedom does not come without responsibility, as there is no such thing as freedom to be irresponsible. There are also desperate attempts to instigate religious bodies and cultural organizations to oppose the bill by spreading falsehood that they are the target of this bill. For the avoidance of doubt, let me categorically state once again, churches, mosques, Suzu, market women associations, etc., as well as local quasi-financial institutions are not NGOs, and thus the bill has nothing to do with their operations.
However, the 8th House of Representatives eventually suspended further legislative action on the bill, citing the need for further consultation with civil society organizations. The National Assembly has an important role to play in relation to civil society organizations. As the legislative arm of government, the National Assembly is responsible for creating laws and policies that affect the activities of CSOs in the country. In this regard, the National Assembly is expected to create an enabling environment for the operation of CSOs by enacting laws and policies that promote their activities and protect their rights. These includes ensuring that CSOs have the freedom to operate without undue interference from the government or other actors. However, this has not been the case. Idris Abdul Maliki, the Executive Director, Conscience for Human and Conflict Resolution Center, CHCRC, said that government lack good understanding of the operations of the civil society organizations, leading them to make laws that stiffen the operation of the CSOs.
The other side of government have not yet appreciated or understand this sector, where they need to know that yes, we are partner in progress.
According to Senator Ibrahim Yahaya Oluriegbe, Vice Chairman, Senate Committee on Diaspora and NGOs, the government views CSOs as partners and recognizes their contribution to national development and nation building. However, in order to maintain credibility, CSOs need to be more effective in their operations.
Societies are not seen as threats, they are seen as partners, and they are recognized as a major contributor. But the only thing which I will say is that the civil society itself needs to step up their game and strengthen and be more professional, because sometimes some civil society use the cover of civil society to be partisan. But where civil society is based on objectivity and they are seen to be able to balance the view, balance I'm talking about, they speak based on facts and not, so our civil society should not bring themselves into the arena in terms of their comment or in terms of their action. They should not be part of the arena that are seen as opposition. They should leave politics and partisanship to the politicians to play while they contribute to the development.
Now let us look at agencies of government that have regulatory powers over CSOs. 5 statutory agencies of government that supervise the activities of CSOs: Corporate Affairs Commission (CAC), The CAC is responsible for the registration and regulation of all organizations, including CSOs in Nigeria. CSOs are required to register with the CAC before they can legally operate in the country. National Planning Commission (NPC). The NPC is responsible for engaging with CSOs in the development and implementation of programs and projects that align with Nigeria's developmental priorities. Federal Inland Revenue Service (FIRS). The FIRS is responsible for collecting taxes from organizations, including CSOs in Nigeria. CSOs are required to pay taxes on their income. Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission (ICPC). The ICPC is responsible for ensuring compliance with the framework for ethical conduct and good governance practices for CSOs and the public sector. Special Control Unit Against Money Laundering (SCUML). SCUML is responsible for preventing money laundering and terrorism financing in Nigeria. CSOs are required to comply with SCUML's regulations on financial reporting and anti-money laundering measures.
When we look at existing laws, when we look at the Corporate Affairs Commission, when we look at all of the regulatory environment that guides the operations of CSOs in Nigeria, we know that there are adequate laws in the country today to guide the operations of civil society organizations.
I stand with civil society very firmly, and I believe that we have enough laws in this country. We're really not in short of laws covering almost every dimension of our national life.
While some of these laws have been controversial and have generated opposition from CSOs, they have continued to comply. National laws and regulations governing CSOs in Nigeria. There are 18 laws that govern the formation and operations of CSOs at the national level, which are derived from federal legislations, and these include Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, 1999 as amended, Companies and Allied Matters Act, Part B and Part F, 2020, Companies Regulations, 2021, Personal Income Tax Amendment Act, 2011, Value Added Tax Amendment Act, 2011, Pension Reform Act, 2014, Taxes and Levies Approved List for Collection Act, 1998, National Planning Commission Act, 1993, Finance Act 2020 as amended, National Financial Intelligence Unit Act 2018, Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences ICPC Act 2020, Money Laundering Prohibition Act MLPA 2022, Federal Inland Revenue Service FIRS Act 2007, FIRS Circulars, Companies Income Tax Act CITA 2004 as amended, Capital Gains Tax Act CGTA 2004 as amended, Terrorism Prevention and Prohibition Act 2022, Customs and Excise Management Act 2004, Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria Act 2011. Civil society organizations (CSOs) in Nigeria have expressed concerns about compliance with regulations for several reasons, including lack of clarity. Some CSOs have expressed concerns about the lack of clarity in the regulations governing their operations. They argue that some of the regulations are vague and open to different interpretations, which makes it difficult for them to comply with the requirements. Complexity. Some CSOs have also raised concerns about the complexity of the regulations, which they argue makes compliance difficult and time-consuming. They point out that complying with the regulations of the donors and that of the government is cumbersome. Funding. CSOs have also expressed concerns about the financial implications of compliance with the regulations. They argue that compliance requires significant financial resources, which may not be available, especially for smaller organizations that rely on donations and grants. Lack of trust. Some CSOs have also expressed concerns about the lack of trust between the government and the civil society sector. They argue that the government has been known to use regulations as a tool to suppress and control the activities of CSOs, which makes compliance with regulations challenging. Compliance burden. Finally, some CSOs have raised concerns about the burden of compliance with multiple regulations. They argue that complying with multiple regulations from different government agencies creates a compliance burden that is difficult to manage and may result in duplication of efforts. Dr. Fumi Akinyele, Executive Director, Food Basket Foundation International, says that the opinion of government that CSOs do not comply with existing laws and regulations governing its operation is inaccurate. According to her, this is far from what is obtainable, as there are several regulations that CSOs comply with. In this regard, her organization is currently working on launching a coordinated system that highlights the compliance regulatory frameworks for CSOs.
There's also a national public directory where CSOs can register and then also go through a compliance verification process where they can say, hey, I have my CAC, I've done my annual returns, I have SCUMU, I've done this, I've done that. Because one of the questions on the regulator's mind, or one of the assertions, is that CSOs are not compliant. But that's not true. There are a lot of CSOs that are compliant. And so it's one way to show that, yes, we're being compliant with all these regulations. Then there's also a support framework whereby people can either call, send messages, all of that to get help with complying with these regulations.
Compliance within the NGO sector, it is not a security matter. It is rather the issue of governance. It is rather the issue of building shared understanding in terms of self-regulation. It's rather the issue of accountability and the rest of that.
When CAC registers you, it looks at the aims and objectives that you intend to do, not something that is a threat to national security, something that is within the ambit of the law. You know, in the UK they have it separately. They have the Charities Act and the NGOs. So as our members of the National Assembly here, we'll call on them to maybe bring a dichotomy between the Charities Act, those to be registered under the charity, those to be under civil society organizations, those that are supposed to be NGOs.
According to Mr. J. Kekpele, founder of Albino Foundation, the agencies of government stiffening laws governing the CSOs do not know the impact it will have on the economy of Nigeria, stating that if the CSO space is not viable for investment, donor agencies will withhold funding, and that will affect Nigerians in general.
It's unfortunate that some of them that are even projecting those aspirations don't know the impact it will have in the lives of the downtrodden, the impact that it will have in the life of politics in itself, and the impact it will have in the image of the country. Because yes, you see us as civil society, you see us as NGO, there are organizations that are funding our activities. If you have a draconian law that is not favorable and will not protect their resources, they will pull back on their resources.
In conclusion, compliance with regulations is a critical concern for CSOs in Nigeria. While regulations are necessary to promote transparency, accountability and good governance practices among CSOs, it is believed there is a need for the government to address the concerns of CSOs and ensure that the regulations are sector-specific and fits the work of the sector. What have been the attempts made by the National Assembly to regulate the operations of CSOs in Nigeria? In spite of the plethora of laws, in the last 8 years, non-profits have come under strong criticism by the government with regards to their accountability and credibility, necessitating a series of bills proposed by the National Assembly during the 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th Assemblies. However, some of these bills were met with opposition from the civil society sector, leading to non-consideration or non-passage, while others did not progress beyond the first reading stage. Between 2007 and 2022, 7 bills on CSO regulation have been introduced in the National Assembly. These include The Donor and Development Partners Commission Bill, which sought to establish a commission to regulate the activities of donors, development partners and international NGOs that provide development assistance and aid to the country. The Foreign Contribution Regulation Bill. This bill sought to regulate the acceptance and utilization of foreign contributions by NGOs in Nigeria. The NGO Regulatory Agency of Nigeria Bill, which sought to establish a national agency responsible for the regulation and supervision of the activities of NGOs in Nigeria. The NGO Regulatory Commission Bill, aimed at establishing a commission responsible for coordinating the activities of NGOs in Nigeria, including registration, licensing, and supervision and monitoring. The Improved Aid Effectiveness, Accountability and Cooperation for Donors and its Recipient Bill, aimed at establishing a comprehensive legal framework for reporting and disclosure of funds to recipients by all donors. The Donor Agency Regulatory Commission Bill, that seeks to establish a commission responsible for the coordination and regulations of donor agencies in Nigeria. The NGOs and CSOs Agency Bill, aimed at establishing a commission for regulating the activities of NGOs and CSOs in Nigeria. For over 15 years, the attempt by the National Assembly to regulate the affairs of donor agencies and NGOs in Nigeria has continued to threaten civic space. Therefore, CSOs believes that these issues need to be thoroughly scrutinized, bearing in mind the roles and contributions of CSOs to national development. Honorable Kabiru Idris, Chairman, House of Representatives Committee on Civil Society Organizations and Development Partners, stated that CSOs are at the forefront of development in Nigeria and are essential contributors to national cohesion. Therefore, the committee will continue to provide a platform for effective and sustained engagements with CSOs.
National Assembly is an open place for all Nigerians. And CSOs, I can say, they are part and parcel of the National Assembly. They are part and parcel of us in two ways. Any program we're attending in the National Assembly, particularly public hearing, budget defense, legislative activities, we didn't invite them.
Let it be known that this bill is not the CSO committee bill, it's the Commerce Committee bill. So what this committee is going to do is mainly some interloping. Unfortunately or fortunately, it has passed at the Senate level. We still have a leeway at the House level before we go to the conference committee.
But this is an important aspect of the work that we do. Going forward, we want to see that society are able to do more, and the regulatory frameworks, the enabling environment that will allow them to do even much more.
It is also an acceptable fact that remarkable success cannot be achieved without substantial and constructive engagement with the National Assembly on the operations of CSOs. One of such engagements of CSOs with the National Assembly was on the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, 2020. The Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, is a law that regulates the registration, formation and management of companies and other business entities in the country. The CAMA was amended in 2020, and the new provisions have generated significant interest and concern among civil society organizations, CSOs in Nigeria. These new provisions, which allows for the suspension and removal of trustees of NGOs without a court order and requires them to seek government approval for certain activities, such as the appointment of auditors to audit their financial statement and the disposal of assets, have raised concerns among CSOs about the potential for government interference and restrictions on its activities. In response to the provisions of CAMA 2020, CSOs in Nigeria have engaged in various forms of advocacy, including issuing public statements, petitions, position papers, and legal challenges. While some CSOs have called for the amendment or repeal of the problematic provisions of the CAMA, others have increased engagement and dialogue with the government to address their concerns. In 2022, the Senate of the 9th National Assembly indicated willingness to engage with CSOs to discuss amending the controversial provisions of CAMA at a public hearing session after a bill was presented and conceded by the Senate in the same year.
The fourth order of the day is the second reading of the Companies and Allied Matters Act 2020, Amendment Bill 2022. Distinguished senators will recall that the bill was read the first time in this chamber on Tuesday, 1st February 2022. Mr. President, you are to invite Distinguished Senator Ibrahim Yahaya Olori Egbe to move the motion for the bill to be read the second time.
Distinguished Senator Ibrahim Yahaya Olori Egbe, Kwara Central.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. My name is Ibrahim Yahaya Olori Egbe. I represent Kwara Central Senatorial District. And Mr. President, my highly respected and distinguished colleagues, I thank you for the privilege to lead this debate on the general principle on the Company and Allied Matters Act 2020, Amended Bill 2022, which seeks to strengthen the operations of non-governmental organizations in Nigeria and their compliance with the provisions of the Act and for other matters connected therewith.
This bill is very, very significant because of so much misunderstanding that surrounds NGO operations in Nigeria. CAMA needs to be amended to provide for proper regulatory framework that regulates how NGOs operate in Nigeria. There are several NGOs in Nigeria that have significant impact with huge investment in our health sector, the political space, and a lot of other area NGOs are doing beautiful work. However, there are a lot of persons that use NGOs in a very, very not charitable manners. And today in Nigeria, there seems to be a misunderstanding with a single soup, using a single brush for every NGO in Nigeria. Therefore, with this amendment, Mr. President, this will cover those NGOs that are doing excellent job, that wants to operate by international standard, respect the laws of the country, to be protected. These laws will cover them.
CSOs in Nigeria have continued to actively engage the National Assembly in advocacy efforts around CAMA 2020 to ensure that the disagreements and controversies around the new provisions are ultimately addressed. In view of the challenges occasioned by these regulations on CSOs, the European Union Agents for Citizens-Driven Transformation (EUACT) project, funded by the European Union and implemented by the British Council, is supporting CSOs to engage the National Assembly and other relevant government bodies on issues relating to existing regulatory frameworks that creates restrictions for the smooth operations of CSOs in Nigeria.
Well, British Council is implementing a program called Agents for Citizen-Driven Transformation, EU Act for short, that is funded by the European Union. So British Council is only implementing it. And so two components to the program, the capacity building, we call it component 1. And then the component 2, which is actually facilitating the process of reforming the regulatory frameworks to make those regulatory frameworks more, and of course not just the framework, the practice side of things, more enabling for CSOs.
In the 2021 Freedom Report, Nigeria was rated as partly free with a score 48 out of 100, which implies that although civil society organizations in Nigeria are vibrant and active, it still faces significant challenges from the government. The report also notes that the Nigerian government has implemented several laws and regulations that restricts the activities of CSOs despite being in the forefront of campaigns for human rights, democratic reforms and accountability. Overall, the report concludes that Nigeria's civil society sector is under threat and that the government needs to take steps to protect the freedoms of CSOs and their ability to operate independently. With support from the EU Act through the British Council, Policy and Legal Advocacy Centre (PLAC) has been able to put together the opinions of CSOs, which have formed amendments to existing laws proposed to the National Assembly, as well as focused on other recommendations that reflect global best practices for enhancing CSOs' operations in Nigeria. These recommendations aimed at creating an enabling environment for CSOs to operate effectively, promote human rights and democracy, and contribute to the country's development are as follows. The government should strengthen institutional framework in a way that allows for CSOs to operate in an enabling environment. And the government should strengthen its collaborations with CSOs and donor agencies to ensure aid effectiveness in Nigeria.